because competition law is pretty much about firms, right? We would like to know how firms make a decision. We would like to understand how the market behaves, and this is probably the most important topic that you will use in practice. Okay, this is probably the most important thing that you will use in practice, which is what we call the market definition. Right? Or sometimes we call it relevant market. Because when you say something like this firm is a monopoly, the statement itself is just incomplete. You can never say that, oh, this firm is a monopoly without knowing what market you are talking about, right? Suppose you blame the CP is a monopoly. Well, that statement is just nothing. You need to be able to say that, okay, CP is a monopolist in this particular market. For example, in pork market. And the next question is where? In Thailand? Or because probably the market coverage of CP is not everywhere in Thailand, let's say. So suppose I'm living quite far away in a tiny town. In that town, there's no CP in it. What I do is I go to the fresh market and I purchase pork and all meats I want from the local producers. In that case, CP is not a monopoly in that market, and I will not bother going to like the town next door or any provinces, because I'm okay. I won't commute at that far, right? So basically, the coverage of CP does not span out to cover some part of it, and you cannot say the CP is a monopoly in that market. So whenever we say, we say that this player is a dominant player, which if you remember in our introduction class, we know that it has to got some sort of like a huge market share. For example, like more than 50% of market share. But the question is what market you are talking about, right? Which market it is. So that's the reason why when you pursue this case in practice, suppose that you will be working in a law firm and you want to specialize in competition law, the very first thing that you need to make an argument is this: okay, I want to draw the market line. I want to define the market first. And once you define the market, you would analyze each market. Okay, and afterwards you can calculate everything you want. You want to know the market share, because you could be a dominant player in one market. I mean, given one firm, you could be a dominant player in one market, but you could be just an ordinary player in another market as well, right? So that whether you will be dominant player, you will have market power at all, depends hugely on the way that you draw the market. So when you draw the market, well, I think I'll start with the case and then we go into detail then. Suppose we're talking about this CP case. All right, we talk about CP case. How would you say that? How would you draw the market for the CP Tesco case? What sort of business that Tesco was running and CP purchased? What sort of business it is?
Retail.
Retail. Okay. Can I call it modern trade? Yeah, it's just an official term for that, right? Modern trade. Okay, modern trade. How would you define the market? Like you have a look at these two firms first, right? CPA and Tesco, for example. What sort of modern trades a CP has?
You mean what type of product?
Yeah, you think about the. Okay, we start with Tesco first. Tesco has what? The type of product is one of them as well, but let's start with the shop.
Groceries,
Yeah, okay, grocery.
household products,
Grocery. And what?
household products,
Yeah, okay. Let's go. Okay, household product. Right?
yes,
Usually you pack these two together. Yeah, but yes. Or sometimes you can detach them as well. And officially this is called home line product. Right? What else? What else could you find in Tesco? CPay.
clothing.
Clothing? Yeah.
All right. All right. What else? Hardware.
I mean, yeah.
Lines and well, sometimes you sorry. Sometimes you call this thing and all those like chemicals, right? What do you use? Detergent. All this thing you call like soft line, right? This is like a terminology they use in the industry, right? So you essentially you have all these different products in Tesco, but let's just zoom out a bit and have a look at it, sort of the nature, the type of store that Tesco has. Well, surely we have this big Tesco, right? Like big Tesco, and what else? What else do we know about Tesco? What other sort of shops do they have?
The express shops.
Yeah, it's called what? It's called Tesco Express, or it's called Tesco.
I'm not sure. I think it's Tesco Express, but I
Or
can
Tesco Slot.
call Tesco Express.
Right? Yeah, this is pretty much the convenience store, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is CVS. How would you categorize Tesco, the big Tesco? What sort of modern trade it is?
Supermarket.
Yeah, that is a fine line between this thing and hypermarket. Yeah, but supermarket is another type, right? So now we know that we have the CVS here. We have supermarket. We have hypermarket. Right? Usually hypermarket is larger, and the products, the coverage of the product is larger than supermarket as well. Right? And they have some sort of criteria as well, like how would you split the zone in which you sell these groceries and the zone in which you sell other product lines. Right? And hypermarket is usually larger than supermarket. Well, the obvious supermarket is like top supermarket. That is supermarket. You have quite a good portion of this groceries product, right? And another type is cash and carry. Could you come up with the store in Thailand that is categorized as cash and carry?
7-Eleven?
7-Eleven is more CVS. It's convenience store. Yes.
Macro.
Yes, macro. So cash and carry is like macro. All right. One thing that is quite unique in hypermarket is this. They're going to have what they call sales floor, right? Sales floor is pretty much the area in which you sell all these things: groceries, home lines, hard lines, soft line. All right. But you will have this sort of rental area in which you lease out like a space for this like clothes shop, what gold shop, right? You could imagine when you go to hypermarkets that would have this pattern, right? Where when you enter it, you're gonna see some restaurants, some rental space, and you're gonna have this sort of like area separated in which you will find all these products. And the line separating between these areas usually these tills. Okay, so that's the uniqueness of hypermarket. Supermarket doesn't have that characteristic. Okay, so what sort of, so Tesco is pretty much hypermarket, right? Okay, so what about CP? What do they have? That is running in the same line of business as Tesco.
Groceries.
Groceries. In which sort of shop? They do have grocery, but in which shop?
I think it's CP Fresh Mart.
CP Fresh
Sure.
Mart. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It exists. Yes. What other businesses CP have in this modern trade?
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven. Yes. What else?
Macro.
Macro. Okay. And they have macro. They have a small macro as well, right? But obviously macro anyway. Yeah. All right. Just to get an idea. So now we know sort of like what sort of business involving here, right? And you also know that this is Fresh Mart is probably selling only groceries, right? 7-Eleven. Well, 7-Eleven is what? CVS. This one is, I think, is, what do you think it is? Is it CVS or what sort of thing it is?
For macro.
For CP Fresh Mart.
Supermarket.
It could be. Yeah, it could be, or you can argue that it could be CVS or supermarket. Yes. All right, and macro is, we know up there is cash and carry. But the difference between cash and carry and hypermarket is this. In other places, cash and carry would sell in bulk, right? You have to buy like a huge pack, and their customers are usually not end users, not end consumers like us, but normally their customers will be retailers, right? Like mom and pop shop and other CVS. But a hypermarket is quite different because hypermarket is where you actually buy yourself. So end consumers go to hypermarket but don't go to cash and carry. All right. And also they have all these sorts of products here as well. So you can see that you have to make an argument here that how would you define the market, right? How would you define the market? Would you go to the product level, or would you go to, if you say that, okay, it doesn't matter because let's say that you pick one, right? You pick hypermarket. So if you draw the market, you say that if you pick hypermarket, the whole reason here is this: you believe that people who go to hypermarket, suppose the hypermarket changed the price or just closed down temporarily, they will not. You ask this question like, okay, would they switch to buy things from somewhere else? Would they?
Can you repeat that again?
And the question is, suppose the hypermarket increases the price of its products by a certain level, how would you substitute it? I mean, would people go to somewhere else instead, or people would just stick with hypermarket?
I mean, people would probably go somewhere else.
You mean in terms of location or in terms of the products?
I think they would go to like a different store that sells the same products because the products are exactly the same. There's no point paying more for the exact same product.
All right. Okay. So you can say that, okay, now, but the thing is, right, if you say that there's this hypermarket, basically what we focus is just the business that we're running by these two companies, these two business operators, like CP and Tesco. But from what we analyzed earlier, we have just only one hypermarket here, right, which is Tesco. Right? We have just Tesco. So the question is this: whether the merger or the acquisition between, I mean, the fact that CP is acquiring Tesco change the market, change the hypermarket structure or not? Does it? Does it change it? Because we have only one Tesco, and when CP purchases, it's just change the hand of the owner, right?
No, I don't think so.
So there's nothing changed here, right? If you say that the market is hypermarket, then there's no change here. What about CVS then?
So there will be CP Fresh Mart, 7-Eleven, and Tesco Express.
Right, so there's some change here, right? You have CP Fresh Mart, you have 7-Eleven, and then you would have Tesco Express. So this will change, right? This will change. And then this is something that you might need to analyze already within this market. You say that, oh, okay, for hypermarket there's no problem because there's no change in terms of market share. It's just change the hand of who the owner is. But for the CVS, now we have more player, right? Now we have more player. So this is something that you might need to explore. And well, as a matter of fact, the market share of CP, even without Tesco Express, was roughly 90% in terms of sales. Roughly 90%. So if you have Tesco Express, it's going to be above 90% for sure. All right. And for C, another market is what? Cash and carry. Okay, what is it with this market?
Macro.
Macro. That's it.
And nothing else.
Okay, so no change, right? No change, no change. And I think we covered everything already. Yes. So this is if you find it sort of like, well, the standard is this. This is the broadest possible market that you can draw, right? Or you can even, actually the broader one is you say that, okay, all of these are just modern trade. All right, people can switch between CVS and supermarket. You think it makes sense? A supermarket is like a monopoly, I just go to 7-Eleven. Or if the hypermarket is monopoly, I would just go somewhere else. You think it makes sense?
No, not really.
Why?
Because both CP and Tesco is like under the big umbrella of modern trade. So if they own those both CVS, supermarket, hypermarket, cash and carry, it will not make any sense. I mean, in terms of competition.
Yeah, but if I say that, well, if it is modern trade, then you still have big say, right? You still have big say, and so the thing is this: if you draw the market to be so broad, it is possible that you could include more players, right? Because now if you say the CVS is like very tense here, it's like 90% market share. But let's say that now in hypermarket you have only Tesco, with say roughly 30-40% of market share. But you still have this Big C, which is owned by BJC, and it is under the umbrella of Thai. Okay. Well, cash and carry is quite unique as well. But suppose that you combine them, and CVS actually you have other players as well, like mini Big C, right? But if you combine them and you can have this share Big C, right? And the sales of normally the sales of hypermarkets is huge, so you will benefit the big, like relatively bigger size of in terms of sale of Big C. That would dilute the market share of CVS as well, right? Because the sale of CVS is not that huge when you compare it to hypermarket. So when you combine them together, probably this merge will not change the market share. You can say that it could be just 40% of the modern trade. But this is not the real number, but you get an idea, right? When you sort of like make the market definition so granular, it is possible that one of these markets could be problematic. But once you put all of them together and you crunch the number again, it could be that your business just covers just 40% of the market, the whole market.
So you're saying that when we define the market, we should keep the definition as broad as possible? Because at the end, if they're like under the same company, they're gonna end up like weighing between the loss and gains together?
If you want your client to win, then you want to draw it as broad as possible, right? Because you can include more and more players, and definitely the commission will challenge it and say that this is too broad. Right? You were saying? Right, because if you draw the market to be quite broad, what happened is this: you could include more and more players, and when you can include more players, it is more likely that your firm would be, I mean, the share of your business would be smaller. But it is not 100% guaranteed. It depends, right? It depends. So now. And I can share that actually you can draw it even more sort of like granular. Say that when you say about hypermarket, you talk about hypermarket of groceries, right? So when you talk about groceries, this is not just about Tesco, Big C. You can say that any ordinary fresh market, right? Sunday market could be included in this market definition as well. And if you say that, okay, hypermarket for the home line, or the home line. Could be things that you're using. Now it is not just about hypermarket, but you can include competitors in here as well. Let's say, but this is like, if you would include what sort of business that you would include in this home line. Where you can buy things to use in your home.
Home Pro.
Yeah, you can include Home Pro as well, right? Home Pro and all other small shops as well. Right? You can make it so granular. Or if you have this sort of hardline, you can hardline, which includes this sort of like electricity, the electronic things, right? Electronic devices. And in that you can include what? Electronic devices, gadgets.
Or does power more, power buy? I think so.
Yeah, exactly, yes. You can include all these as well, like power buy, right? And all these like shops. So it depends on you whether you, but it is not something that you can do like willy-nilly, okay? It is something that you have to make an argument. And the key argument is this. There are two possibilities. The first thing is you look at the demand side, right? You look at the demand side and you see that, well, which I think it makes sense. I mean, you would say that, okay, people might go to hypermarket to get this certain product like groceries. Okay, but if you say that, no, actually, so if sorry, let me put it in more vivid way. If you argue that people go to hypermarket to buy just one type of product, usually they go for, if they go for groceries, they go for groceries, and that's it. If you can, and the way you argue is you actually go out and collect the data. You ask them, you ask like these customers, and there's a standard way of doing that, which is pretty much what we call market research. You ask them if you come here specifically just for groceries, or you actually come here to buy a variety of these things like hard line, soft line, home line things. If most of them say that I am actually here for hypermarket to buy all these things and also go to these restaurants, which I think it makes sense, then it doesn't make sense anymore to separate it into this sort of like level of granularity, right? You don't, because people don't go there to buy groceries only. They also find out that these are also like electric devices as well, or they buy home line as well. Or the other way around, the people want to buy electric device, they want to go to Tesco, they go to Power Buy, they go to these electronics shops, right? That is possible as well. And if you cannot make that argument, then probably you have to scope. I mean, you have to expand your scope a bit and say that people go to hypermarkets not to buy just a particular line of product. Or you can say that people, well, a good portion of people go there to buy groceries, but for home line, for hard line, for soft line, you can't really separate them. All right, that is possible as well, and that is something that you have to make an argument. But I understand that in our case, especially in the real case, they don't go to that granularity. They stop at this level of hypermarket. They even actually go to modern trade. All right. And another thing is you look at the supply substitution in the sense that suppose that at this hypermarket increase the price, could there be anyone who would open the shop? Could the distributor or the wholesalers open their own shop as well, open their own modern trade? Which I think this one is quite difficult in this case, right? So you look at demand. But also the question is this: what if, there's, I'm not trying to come up with any hypermarket near my place, which is none. suppose the Tesco next door increased the price of everything by 10%. Do you think I would try that hard to go to, say, okay, in Bangkok there are so many Tesco, right? But suppose that you are in Chiang Mai, and suppose there is one. Okay, Chiang Mai is a bad example, but suppose that there's only one Tesco in Chiang Mai, but the price of Tesco in Chiang Mai increases by 10%. Would you drive all the way to Nan or to Prague to buy to go to Tesco? Would you drive all the way there just to go to buy groceries?
No, the gas fee might be higher.
Right, so it doesn't make sense. So this is like in terms of product, right? You asked about whether, okay, would you go to CVS instead of hypermarket? Maybe you say maybe yes, maybe no, because the products that are on shelf in hypermarkets, like there's so much more of them when you compare to CVS. The variety is just uncomparable. So usually you don't mix them up, okay? But also there's another dimension, which is the geographic, right? Because if you go into this shop, you want this shop in Ayutthaya, you won't drive all the way to Chiang Mai to buy the product. So you can't really include these two shops in the same market, right? You can't include all the shop in Chiang Rai and all the shop in Thailand, in Ayutthaya, and say that they are actually in the same market. It doesn't make sense because they are not competing against each other. And the way we do this in practice is this: you collect the consumers' data, right? Because we have this sort of member like Big Card or Tesco card, and in that card you're gonna know this is geographic address. You know the address of your customers, and you can sort of plot this thing, right? Like this is your shop, and you know, like, okay, these are my customers. They are living not that far away from my shop, but there might be some outliers, but you just delete them. And you can roughly draw this sort of circle, right, with a certain radius. And you say that, okay, most of our customers would travel 30 kilometers to go to our shop. But this varies across different locations, right? I mean, in countryside, 30 kilometers is nothing. There's no traffic, right? But in towns, probably this radius becomes just 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. So there are two dimensions here that you will separate, right? So the market is not just hypermarket. The market should be like, well, we're talking about hypermarket in this location, this Paramsi area, right? We're talking about CVS in this Bangkok area. So there are two dimensions: the product, which includes service, and the geography. That's the way you draw market definition. And I mean, if you can, so what is the best thing that you want to do if you are representing a firm who would like to merge? What is the best case of market definition that you would like to go for?
So, you said earlier that we want the market definition to be as broad as
Yes.
possible. So, yeah, we might stick to that.
Yeah. I mean, which is essentially the broadest you can go is the global market, right?
Well, maybe not global market, but at least, I mean, within Thailand.
Yeah. Well, if you will make an argument for the global market, what you can do is this sort of like market entry, in the sense that there's no constraint. So, for example, it's like online, right? This online sort of space. New players could actually come in, and I mean, Thai consumers could get access to them quite easily. Right. And in competition case, okay, there are some other things, right? There are some other things, but especially in merger case, this is so important, and you spend 80% of your time working on this, and the remaining 20% you sort of like try and say that, okay, the market is not that difficult to enter, or you try to say that, well, when you merge, you will get this sort of synergy, right? CP will learn something from Tesco, because Tesco is an international company, so we have some benefits out of that. Or you might need to talk about some other stakeholders as well, some other some other involving parties. Could you come up with any sort of like other stakeholders who might be affected by this merger as well? That we didn't mention about them at all.
The small shops.
Yeah, small shops are, well, you can include them in CVS, and yeah, they are pretty much the remaining 10%, or remaining less than 10%, right? Yeah. Who else? Who else will be affected by this merger? Apart from consumers.
The people who supply the products to Tesco and CP.
Right. Yes, suppliers, right? Suppose that you were selling something to Tesco and CP. Before merger, what you can do is, if you give me a really low price, I would just sell the remaining part to. Suppose you're talking to CP and you say, oh no, if you push the price to be so low, I would just sell my product to Tesco, right? But suppose now that you don't have any choice anymore, because now Tesco and CP are owned by the same business operator, so you don't have this sort of bargaining power anymore. And definitely, as a supplier, you will be affected. So when you pursue this case, you would have to make an argument as well that how would you, if you want the merge to go through and get a clearance, you might have to say that you have to come up with just sort of like evidence to support that, oh, we won't have this much negotiation power anyway, because they still can sell their product to some other places, right? If we merge, then this is not just in the CVS, they also sell to what other sorts of business as well, and we won't have that bargaining power, right? This is something that you have to make an argument as well, but these things would come afterwards. The first thing that you need to say is, okay, what's the market definition is. And in practice, what you do is you start from somewhere very conservative, right? Say that, okay, suppose that we draw the market as small as possible, as we discussed, like groceries, online, Tesco, within hypermarket, and within certain geographical area, say the radius like 20 kilometers. That is probably the most conservative, right? Conservative in the sense that this is the smallest market I can do. And if I can prove that my market share or market power is still not that substantial within this smallest case, then this is so clear that if I draw the market in the broader sense, I would not have market power, right? So if you can do that, then your case is going to be so strong. Okay, any questions so far?
About the market area you just mentioned, yes. Is it the same with market definition, or like it's a separate topic?
You mean the radius thing here?
Yeah.
It's the same, yes, it's the same. There are two dimensions. the product dimension and the geography dimension.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but this could be nation as well. You say that it doesn't matter where you are. So let's say that you have this sort of like one price policy. Okay, and you say that, oh, it doesn't matter where you are because you can go anywhere and geography means nothing. Or this like online shopping things. It could be like a whole country as the market in terms of geography. That is possible as well. It depends on your argument. All right. So that's pretty much market, relevant market or market definition in a nutshell. I cannot stress enough how important it is, but in practice, this is the first thing that you need to really work out. All right. When you look at the terms in the law, it says that a relevant market of goods and service which are of the same type or substitutable, right? When you consider all these things like qualifications, prices, purpose of use, and the area where such goods are sold. And in a nutshell, that is something that we talk about, right? The characteristic of product and the area, right? So when you talk about market definition, it is this product and service and geography, right? So when this thing is something that I need to introduce as well. I think I've talked about it already, but you remember this sort of horizontal and vertical, right? In most cases, the more problematic case will be when something is going between business operators that are competing horizontally, like Tesco and CP. And then afterwards, when we draw this market, done with it, then we would just start to ask, okay, what would happen to these suppliers or these distributors or this wholesaler? All right. And this is from the law, all right? To say the same or substitutable based on what? Then it's based on two things, right? The product and service. Could be qualification, could be price, could be purposes. Right. So for example, hospital. You can think of hospital as well, and you draw the market for it, and you say that the characteristic is like, you might remember the case of BDMS trying to hostile merge BH, right, which is from Lurat Hospital. In that case, they were trying to argue that okay, the first argument is that they are in separate markets. BH is like in the super premium, and BDMS is in the premium market. They have different set of consumers, so when they merge, nothing changed. That is the easiest argument to make, right? It's like here. When you are CP, you will say that, yeah, cash and carry is pretty much a separate market, and when there's nothing changed, you don't have to do anything. But if I were a commission, what I would do is this. Well, macro, I mean, you think about it in reality. Macro, this cash and carry elsewhere could be quite separated, could be quite different from hypermarket. But in Thailand, it is us, right? And consumers who actually go to macro to buy stuffs. So you can't really separate hypermarket and CC. You should include them. But if you do that, it means that the macro and Tesco would have quite a fair share, right? If they are in the same market, if you combine this hypermarket and CC. So if you are representing CP, you say that no, we are in a separate market. It's like in the case of hospital. VDMS would say that we are in separate market, right? This market definition is really, it's quite fun when you work in the field. It's like, wow, find all the evidence, make an argument. Okay, this is not something that you can just claim, but you really need then evidence to prove it. All right. The question is how. Well, there are 3 dimensions here, right? These are the products substitutability, and there are 3 dimensions: the demand, the supply, and a potential competition. In practice, what is the most obvious way to approach this is the demand substitutability? Because in most cases it's quite difficult to argue that you know what, if you increase the price, the distributor or the producer would basically enter the market and set up a shop themselves, or they would change the business, right? They change from being a supplier, they would be a retailer, or they would be a wholesaler themselves. That is quite difficult, and it takes time. It would not happen. I mean, it would not happen overnight. But demand substitutability, this is something that's ongoing. That is why what they ask for you is they're gonna ask like this historical data. And the most powerful things to show this is the price elasticity of demand. And that is why we need to learn about it. I think now you understand already. The cross elasticity of demand means that, okay, if the price of Tesco increase, what happened to the demand of macro? For example, right? If we want to know that macro and Tesco are competing within the same market, the very easy test is this: whenever certain product or a group of product in macro increases, what happened to the demand of Tesco? If the price of certain group of products of macro increases, then the demand of Tesco increased. And it happens every time. It's not just once, but whenever it's happened, the demand increases as well. What can you conclude from this evidence? What can you conclude?
That they are competitors.
Yes.
In the same market.
Yes. Right. You can say that well, evidently they should be in the same market. But on the contrary, if the evidence shows that, okay, whenever the price of the products in macro increase, there's nothing happened on the demand of the same product at Tesco, then the conclusion would be they're not competitors. They're not competing against each other, right? So this is something that's quite ideal to use. But you can use something of like a lower quality as well, like a price series, price level. You can plot the price and see that, okay, price seems to be quite similar, but that proves nothing, right? When you imagine that, because it could be just because of the cost that increased, because of the price of the input has increased, and because they use the same input, that is why the price has changed as well, right? You can't really just say that, oh, you look at them, when the price increased, the other one increased as well. But it could be just because the cost, they share the same level of cost. And that's, well, maybe they're not competing. Because if the price of some product in Chiang Mai increased, it could be possible that the price of some product in Bangkok increase as well, but doesn't mean that they're competing against each other. Right. Or in other words, that is pretty much what we call correlation doesn't imply causation. Right? And you have to show, this is actually something that's written in the law, you have to show the data. You cannot just make this claim without any data to back it up. Right? You need to collect data from your client. You have to request the data from the merchant party as well. And you might need to collect data from consumers in order to ask them whether you did this quite similar to this exit poll, right? You will be waiting at a till and you ask like, okay, suppose that the things that you bought in the basket prices increased by this level, would you go somewhere else? And this is something that actually the business is doing, right? And normally they do it because they want to know who their competitors are, and they're going to have this exit poll. They ask like their customers after they access the till, like, okay, given the things that you bought in your basket, what if we close the shop for like 7 days? Where else would you go to buy them? Could you give us in terms of ranks, like, okay, who's the first alternative, who's the second? This thing could be collected and used as the evidence to show this substitutability, or prove otherwise, prove that they are not substitutable, right? Okay. So this I just show, right? Could be all this information that I talked about. You collect the data from all possible parties, trade partners, consumers, or competitors. And you can do this consumer preferences. As I said, the one that exit poll is actually called consumer preferences or market study, right? You go out and you ask people. You just give out this questionnaire and ask and collect them and analyze the data. And you can ask, like, is there any sort of regulation that limits the substitutability, right? Or other constraints. This is more about supply substitutability, which basically means that you enter the market, right? Okay. And this is a geographical market, which exactly you do pretty much the same thing, right? You don't expect people to travel all the way to somewhere to buy something. Then you should not include them in the same geographical market. But sometimes there are other constraints as well, maybe culture, maybe lifestyle. You can sort of like cut the market into strata, right? And say that well, like in the case of well, if people of certain type will not travel, or if you have this sort of like provinces that are next to each other, but you know, the people want to travel across these provinces, or you have this community of certain religions, did you know that they won't travel to buy something else nearby, even though they are quite close by? But that is possible as well, and you have to use data to prove that. All right. If you cannot find this evidence, the standard test that has been used everywhere in the world is called a Snip Test. Snip Test. Well, I recommend you to remember the term, because this is a term that if you say it, people would know that you know about competition law roughly. Snip Test it stands for small but significant non-transitory increase in prices, which doesn't really make sense to anyone listening to it for the first time. But it means this: you start from the end, right? You say that well, there is an increase in price, but it is increased in a non-transitory way, which basically means that it increased for quite some time, say a year or 2 years, right? It is not like 100% or 1000%, but increase certain level, and usually we use 10% or 5%, which we say that it is significant enough that people will change behavior. Because if you change just by 2% or 1%, people will just don't care, right? People won't care. They will say, oh, it's okay, that is not significant. But we want to overshoot it to like 100%, all right? So like in case of Tesco, and let's say that I say that Macro is in the same market, right? You would say this: what if Tesco increase everything in its shop by 10%? Would people decide to switch to Macro, right? Or simpler case, let's say that you have banana, right? You have banana, and you increase the price of banana by 10%, right? And you ask this question: okay, would consumers switch to buy something else? You think if you go to the shop, you love banana, suppose, and the price of banana increased by 10%, what sort of thing that you would switch to? What fruits?
You can maybe switch to apple.
Apple, right? Okay, suppose apple. Then we can say that, okay, we should actually include banana and apple in the same market. Right? It's not just a market of banana, it's a market of banana and apple. And you ask this, all right, suppose that now they are in the same market and all of them increase the price by 10%. What will you switch to?
Maybe orange.
Orange. Right? So in this case, you say, no, it's not just banana, apple, but it should be banana, apple, and orange in the same market. And you keep doing this. You understand the idea? You keep doing this and you say, okay, what if banana, apple, and orange increase that price by 10%? What else would what else would consumer or customers switch to? And you keep doing that until you say that, oh, I have included these things. And suppose this thing increased by 10%, what would happen? And I would say you can call this thing like fruits, right? And you say, oh, well, fruits are fruits. If it increased by 10%, people would just buy them anyway, right? And that you stop there and you say that, okay, this is a market of fruit because I have included possible substitute already, right? That's the way you draw the product market. But this actually could be used as a geography market definition as well, right? You can use this sort of logic. And this explains the process that I put in the next slide, right? You start from this, and it is called hypothetical monopoly. Because of what? Because as I did, you include Apple and then you sort of hypothetically say that, okay, suppose this is a monopoly, you can increase the price by 10%. What would you do? Right? And it is still profitable in the sense that people want to just shy away and buy something else. Then you say that, yeah, this is a separate market and you stop there. But if no, people would just switch to buy something else, then you would not profitably increase price. Right? In that case, you have to include more product because there are still some substitutable products out there. So you include them and you ask the same question again. This is what we call a snip test. All right. So, for example, you can use this elasticity test as well when you design, right? The demand is like, okay, for example, like buses. When you talk about like, let's say that, well, you have bus and you would ask like, okay, the thing is actually the product is the commute, right? The commute. If people want to commute between like from one point to another point, and you can ask like, okay, what are the possibilities of commuting from one point to another? Well, buses could be, and you ask like, okay, what if the bus fare increases by 10%? Would people switch to something else? Well, in some market, you can say that, okay, people will probably take a train, right? Or take a plane. But that could be possible as well. But it is not, because this route is essentially serviced by bus only. Then your market has to be bus services. Right? And there are other cases as well. But if you look at this case of Taurus and Sario, which is about this, well, you know Sario, right? Well, Taurus and Sario is essentially where you have this sort of paper of different qualities. Okay? And well, that would be the merger between companies at Taurus. And they argue that even though the paper quality is like a high grade paper and lower grade paper, Taras is actually running the company that is selling this high-grade paper. But they argue that, okay, if we increase the price by a little bit, then another company would just enter the market, because I mean the companies that are producing these lower quality papers would be able to upgrade it without that much effort, and they can actually compete against us as well, right? So in that case, you can argue for the supply substitutability. But the switching has to be easy, rapid, and feasible. This is something that you need to prove. All right, and there's no barriers to entry. Okay. One sunk cost that is quite important is this. The main constraint. For example, Coke, I mean, anyone could produce Coke, right? You just put some sugar in the water and you carbonate it. And then you have carbonated drink. But you won't be able to beat Coke, even though it could be that it is quite easy, right? In the supply point of view. I mean, I can produce it. Anyone can produce it. But what Coke has been paying a lot of money on, especially in the past decade, is on marketing, right? And that could be considered as one barrier to entry as well, because if you want to beat Coke, well, well, Coke has been so influential. Like in Mexico, if you read the news, Mexico, like Coke is like something of like almost a religion, right? Every single household drinks Coke every day and in abundance. So I mean, there's so many, or this obesity problem, but the thing is, that is one of the outcome of this marketing campaign, right? And in Nestle and Perrier, they argue that, oh, I mean, if they merge and the substitution can be any drinking company can do that. Sorry, but the counter argument is that, well, it's not that easy to pay the big amount of money on marketing campaign and to gain the traction and to attract consumers to switch to buy your product, even though you can produce such a quality, I mean, it's the same quality product, but marketing plays a big part, all right? So in reality, you prove this by using all this sort of elasticity, right? You just try to prove that there is a relationship between this or not, right? Because you need to say this, right? Would you substitute this, and how would you prove that the banana and apple are actually, if you increase the price of banana by 10%, well, people would just switch to apple, and the way to prove it is to use elasticity, right? To show that, okay, evidence has shown that in the past 5 years, whenever the price of banana increased by 10%, we see this magnitude of increase, like in terms of demand of of apple, let's say by even more than 10%. In that case, you can say that, wow, it is quite clear that these two things are substitutable, right? And you keep doing this. If the elasticity is quite low, then they are not substitute, right? And you just separate them. But if you cannot find this, because in practice it's quite difficult, you can go for something just like at a lower level, use the price correlation test, right? You sort of see that, okay, whenever this price increase, another product, even if the price of banana increase, the price of apple also increases. But you have to be careful of this thing called confounding factors. What I mean by confounding factors, I suppose like that, right? Like the cost. Well, there must be something wrong, or there must be something wrong with it. There must be for example, a natural disaster that make the supply short, that create a supply shortage. And when you have a supply shortage, then the cost has to increase as well. And that is why, well, it happens with across all different sort of like agricultural products, not just banana or apple, but also on rice and other things as well. And that is the confounding factor, right? It doesn't mean that, okay, when the price of this increased, then another price increased. No, okay? But it's useful to screen out, in which sense that But if there's low correlation, right, there's no relationship at all between the price of one thing and price of another, then you can sort of safely say that they might not be related. But if there is high correlation, you cannot jump to the conclusion that they are correlated and they must be included in the same market. You understand that, right? Okay. And the price differences could be used as well, and they have been used in so many cases here, right? The way that he uses is that if the price difference is so high, in the sense that you buy just a water, a soft drink, and the price is like per liter is like 20% or 100% different, then in that case you might not say that these two things are substitutable. 2p plus e means that this if you say that well, water is 10 baht a bottle, and if you are you are pursuing a case for this mineral water, right, Fiji, and how much is it per bottle for Fiji?
60 baht.
60 baht,
Okay.
right? It basically means that 2p plus e is like, yeah, I mean, even I have like 2 times of this water, it's just 20 baht, right? So this is like so different. And if you are running this mineral water company like Fiji and you wanna merge with other, and you say, well, actually we have all substitutes like 80 drinking water in the market should be in the same market as, and you cannot find the data above here. You cannot find them. Well, you can probably say that, oh, if you look at the price difference, I mean, you ask them maybe as a commission, you say, wow, the price difference is like so huge, and I don't think they are substitutable, right? And you can use characteristics of products as well, but most of the times this is useless, right? Like banana and apple, or well, I'm trying to come up with some things that are actually quite different. Bus and plane are essentially a very good example. You look at the purpose, right? You don't look at how the product looks. Okay, and that essentially means that you cannot. It's so difficult to say that because the characteristics of product are different, you should not include them in the same market. All right. Well, there are all sort of things that people do, I mean, use during their free time, all sort of activities, right? Now, I think skateboarding is becoming more and more popular again. But you can also spend your free time on all other things as well, not just the sport, but also something for leisure. And these things are substitutable, even though they look completely different, right? And this last thing is temporal and seasonal and multiple markets. Well, you can talk about like season, like, okay, fruits coming out at different seasons. Like in the summer we have durian and all these things, but in the winter we don't have it. So whatever come out in the winter should not competing directly with fruits that come out in the different season, right? Okay. Well, that is pretty much something that you just like think about them in terms of like they are substituting directly. But there's also another thing which is called secondary market as well. We call it aftermarket. Suppose I bought a printer. I will need some cartridge for it, right? I will need some ink to use together, right? So the concept is this: if consumers were to consider this when purchasing the primary products, they should be considered the same market as primary products, not a separate one, right? And actually printer is a very classic, right? What you need to consider is like proportion to the price of the primary market, especially if this is high. And this cartridge is quite expensive, right? You bought it like for just because why do we need to care about this? It's like if you don't care about cartridge or ink at all, then essentially you can do anything in the ink market, and you can say that the price. Sorry. Suppose that I'm a printer producer, right? And I will say that I'll just I'll just keep the price of the printers the same. But because consumer would need to use the cartridge anyway, what I would do is I would change the price of cartridge. Right? So essentially it means that if you merge with another firm, or for example, if I'm a printer like my brother, right? I'm a company this, and I have this cartridge. I mean suppliers, not cartridge suppliers, but cartridge producers, A and B. Suppose that I'm owning just A, right? And B is just nothing. And I want to purchase B. And I say that there's nothing, I'm not changing the price at all, right? But what happens is this: if you become an owner of B here, even if you say that this is a different market, different level, but if you're an owner of another cartridge company, you can just keep the price of you can basically keep the price of printer at the same level, but you increase the price of the cartridge instead. Right? So consumer would decide, right? Consumer would decide if you have to change, if the price is quite significant, the consumer would consider the cartridge as well, and it should be included in the same market as printer. And in that case, probably you can include more player, or you may include, or your market share as brother would increase, right? Because if you think about just the printer, there will be some third party as well, right? And like Canon. And there will be some other this as well. If you include just this, then maybe your market share would be certain level. But because if you include this, then it will change the market structure altogether, right? Because you have to include this aftermarket or secondary market as well. And especially if you have to change it quite frequently, like oil, filters, or cartridge, then they should be put in the same market. And the knowledge of consumers as well. Right? So our consumers, if consumer consider the price, because when you buy the printer, I think it's quite rational for you to have a look at how much is this for ink that I will need to buy afterwards, because that's something that I need to keep buying. Right? And there's the case of Kodak. Well, maybe some of you have not heard of it, but it used to be the largest producer of this photography industry, and also they. But the thing is that in this case, they use the narrow definition of secondary market for spare parts and services, which the court considered otherwise. Right? But be careful of this. It's called cellophane fallacy. It comes from the DuPont case. All right. Snip in non-merger cases must use competitive price, not the current market price. Right? And that what does it mean is this: if you use this snip to draw the market price, especially for the dominant player, they have had the market power already, right? Because, therefore, you might see no change in their price at all, or maybe the price has even decreased previously. But it doesn't mean that they don't have market power, or you should not draw them. You really need to use the competitive price, which normally would be lower than the market price. Okay, because if they have this market power, even if they are monopolists already, they would set the price at a certain level that they cannot increase the price even further. Right, and that is demand substitutability. We use Snip Test. But for the supply, this is another side. I say it has to be someone who is ready to jump into the market and operate as a competitor without much loss, without much risk and without much cost. Right? You use essentially the same factors as demand that we talked earlier. And potential competition means that the market entry. Well, it's slightly different, right? Market entry could be from elsewhere, could be from abroad, could be from players in other industries. Like CP see this opportunity in hospital, and they just build a hospital, right? A CP medicine, but they do that, and that is potential competition. They have never been in anything related to hospital before, but they see an opportunity and you jump in. So that is potential competition. And geographic is you can use the same Snip test above, but you can also have this sort of shipment test. Shipment test is the idea that well, this is a little in from outside, a little out from inside. It's just like the way that you push the market boundary out, right? And you say that, okay, if I expand this and people want to come into the market, come into this geographical area, how much would they have to put in effort, right? Until that you find that there won't be that many players who would come in from outside the market, then that would be little in from outside, right? But the flip side of it is that you say that, okay, there won't be that many players who would go out of the scope or deliver the product outside of this geographical area. Then that is little out from inside. And the way is you just trace back, right? And you say that, okay, suppose in the Bangkok metropolitan area, there are these players. And in the past 5 years, there is just only 1 or 2 players who enter this area to do this sort of delivery or shipment of the product, right? That's something you can use as well. Transportation cost is essentially you, as you said, right? You won't travel all the way there, like you won't drive because the fuel cost would definitely exceed the level of the difference in price. So that is transportation cost. Or consumer preference could be used as well, that you won't go to that place, you won't go that far, you're gonna buy something in your local, right? Because there are so many cases where consumers come up with a campaign themselves, they're gonna buy just only the domestic product, the local product. Well, it happens so often in elsewhere. I mean, so many places in the world, like in England. There's so many this sort of like community idea that, I mean, you are going to just purchase products from your local shops, and you won't drive that far to buy something else, even especially from big chain shops. But that happens. All right. So yeah, this is what I meant by little in from outside, little out from inside, right? Import just account for a small part of local consumption. I mean, that depends on what you mean by local consumption. Is consumption. It basically means the area that you were exploring. Okay. All right. So that's what I want to cover today. I think that's the market definition, and next time we would cover this market power. We know where the market is first, and then we consider whether which player is powerful, which player is not powerful, which player is a dominant player, which player is not. But before that, we need to understand how to draw the market, right? Any question? No?
So just one quick question.
Yes.
So in order to consider which market you're in, I mean, can you explain one more time, like how substitutability plays a part in which market that firm is in? I mean, yeah.
How does it work? Like, but essentially the way it works is like what we discussed at the very beginning here. right? Substitutability. You start from well, you start from, most of the time you start from the most granular level, right? And you say, okay, demand substitutability means that, okay, would consumers switch between hypermarket and CVS? No, maybe no, right? And if you can argue that actually they're switching between hypermarket and CVS, you just merge them into the same market. And by having that, you can draw all the players, right? CP, Fresh Mart, 7-Eleven, Tesco Express, Tesco, and you can, and then you include all other players like Big C, CVS. Big C also have this mini Big C as well, Family Mart, mom and pop shops, and all these players into the market. And then you could consider how powerful the businesses that are owned by these two business operators is, right? And then you consider whether, well, I think you will be a dominant player, and I think I would not allow you to merge. So, am I answering your question?
Yes, so it means that in order to determine whether you're in the same market as your competitors, you need to determine your own substitutability. Is that correct?
I think it's both, right? It's both your and your competitors as well.
Okay.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, this thing is, you start from, actually you start from each, right? You say that, okay, this is my business, and I want to draw the market for my business. If it happens to include the business of my merging party, then that's it, all right? But if it happens to not include, then essentially you say that well, we are in essentially a separated market. You get what I mean?
Yes, so if you're in a separate market, then you don't have to consider next whether you have the market power or not, because it doesn't count as in the same market in the first place.
Yes, but that's
Okay.
a caveat here is that is particularly in the case of merger, right? Because merger is about like you changing the market structure. But you could
Yes.
still be considered a market dominant, dominant player anyway, right? Being a dominant player, you would need to draw the market definition as well. And like in this case, okay, without any merger, for example, would you say the CVS is like definitely, CP is a market dominant player, regardless of whether they merge Tesco or not, right? And then you just consider whether, okay, you have done anything bad or not. Because being big is not wrong. Being big is just like a red flag that, well, this business operator is quite powerful, and maybe they can do something bad, right? This is the conduct part. They could do something bad, and we might need to investigate, right? But before that, you have to draw the market first to be able to say that this player is a dominant player.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, so many applications to say that someone is big, to say that a merger may cause problem, right? This thing is like required at the very beginning. You need to be able to draw the market first. Yeah, you can have your own exercise as well and think about any case like any Bumrung Rat or Grab, right? Grab and Uber. Yeah, every single case can be. The starting point has to be this market definition thing. All right, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll see you next week. Apologies for today again. I kept you waiting. Sorry. Yep. Okay, Cap, I'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye. You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.